If the first two missions primarily serve to establish central ideas of Thief's storytelling and gameplay, it's with Cragscleft Prison where the game officially takes the training wheels off.
I went to Cuddy's place to deliver the scepter, but Cuddy wasn't there. He'd been arrested by the Hammerites. Apparently they didn't approve of his occupation, and I doubt they approve of mine. So hopefully they'll never catch sight of me when I break him out of their prison. Which is what I'm going to do.
Behind the scenes, Cragscleft is particularly important because of how it was used as a proof of concept demo in February 1998 to assuage publisher Eidos's worries. As I mentioned previously, Tom Leonard did a late-stage rewrite for the AI around this time, which didn't finish until March 1998. Thanks to a copy of the Thief 2 source code originating from a Dreamcast dev box, we can verify that some of the code needed to be hacked together in time for this demo. I think this is an important thing to note because I believe what helped keep the funding for the project was less the minutiae of the NPCs, so much as the foundational design Cragscleft was built on. In other words, the vibe and meaning of the mission, even in rough shape, was the deciding factor. Alright, let's get into the mission objectives and difficulty modifiers. Since the level is so much larger, there's more nuance to the changes, including some which are environmental that I'll bring up later. Like before, higher difficulties have more enemies roaming about which you can't kill, and requires backtracking of Cuddy and Basso the Boxman in tow. I mentioned before how objectives help to give a sense of Garrett's priorities and morality, so keeping tabs on that, his aversion to killing out of professionalism is clear, and note how the special loot requirement for his Lucky Hand of Glory is secondary to rescuing Cuddy, with normal lacking it completely. The necessary loot requirement has risen, coming out to about 59% needed on Expert. This is still fairly generous, but it does mean searching more thoroughly is necessary, since there's some loot removed in higher difficulties in the waterways. Loot removal isn't too common, but it happens on occasion for balancing and can sometimes read as an oversight during development. For instance, you can only get a total of 1429 loot in Baffords, but buying a full stack of speed potions would take 1500 gold. This implies either the potions change costs, or Baffords used to have more loot, with a redundant potion even being removed on Expert. Considering everything else the difficulty changes are doing, and the struggle in trying to maintain game balance between the shop and pickups between missions, minor quibbles like this are more than understandable. Finally, Garrett's loadout has some significant changes, notably lacking any of the new moss arrows on Expert unless you buy them. But right, new arrow types. The aforementioned moss arrows can muffle noises on the floor around a small surface, which is incredibly useful over stretches of tile or grating. And noisemakers create a temporary distraction that lures enemies away and can be reused, at the cost of anyone hearing remaining on very high alert after, to the point they can come running from small sounds from Garrett. Going forward, both of these are essential parts of Garrett's kit, letting you be proactive working around guard routines rather than passive. Also, you can buy some tips for tips, which I think is cool but easy to exploit since there's nothing stopping you from reloading after reading what's on them. Alright, enough yapping. The mines are an appropriately moody area introducing zombies, slightly larger spiders, and skeletons? Yeah, it's pretty clear these more supernatural elements are holdovers from Dark Camelot, which I appreciate since a lot of medieval fantasy can seem a bit dry without them. I know some players aren't a huge fan of zombies since they have somewhat ambiguous awareness states, but I personally find them rather creepy, and they're slow enough that it's easy to avoid them so long as you don't trap yourself in a corner or something. Plus, check out what happens when you use holy water on them. Sick, right? Since a new enemy type is being introduced, the mines themselves aren't too difficult to navigate but require a bit of platforming. Hard and Expert bar off the room containing the holy water font on the second floor, and remove the button from the elevator that takes you directly to the fourth floor. That said, it's still just barely possible to hit the elevator button on the third floor if you jump on top of a box and fire an extremely precise arrow. While difficult to do, I like that this is an option if you're trying to avoid the undead, and this mechanical possibility may have been the inspiration for one of the secrets in Thief 2. Beyond this, navigating here isn't too difficult, with most of the challenge coming from loot being placed in obscure dark corners. Really, this all serves as a prelude to...
The time was, all these halls would be close packed with novices, striving to learn our teachings.
There are novices still.
But fewer, brother, fewer. Youths in this time seek to learn about gold and politics, not honest craft.
'Twill be their loss when they come of age and know not how to accomplish aught of consequence.
There were hints about what the Hammerites were like back in Baffords, but wow, that's certainly some ye olde in English. The Hammerites were based on the Catholic sect depicted in Umberto Eco's In the Name of the Rose, which was a huge influence on the team and inspired quite a lot of the world building. It's not quite time to explore in detail how much was pulled from. The bulk of that discussion will be saved for Undercover, but for a start, compare the similarities to the book's Abbey map with the in-game maps. The conversation between the Hammerites also appears to allude to an early passage from the book where the narrator Adzo ruminates on kids these days. Back on track, the Hammerites function identically to guards with the same awareness and alert states, although they do have different dialogue. One fun thing is you can lure a zombie near a Hammerite and watch them duke it out. The game uses a simple team system to determine what entities and AI should be hostile or neutral towards. Unsurprisingly, most characters are hostile towards Garrett and neutral to other members of their faction. Like most of Thief's systems, the cause and effect are fairly logical. I couldn't find any irregularities in my research. Anyway, there are two main paths leading into the factory. The stairs past this Hammerite are easy to get to, but require sneaking through an area with
Clanky metal grating. I better tread softly.
the access elevator is somewhat more difficult to sneak to, but avoids this section altogether. When zooming out, you can see how this whole area is comprised of loops to help avoid the patrols, iterating on the more rectangular hallways from Bafford. I'm a big fan of these little pockets of outside sprinkled around to help give some visual variety. It calls to mind some of the techniques the original Tomb Raider used to imply a world outside of the playable space. It's neat. The reason why they're looping corridors beyond avoiding patrols is to funnel you into story breadcrumbs, since there's a more direct storyline within the mission this time. The smithing area is low-key one of the hardest areas to get by undetected, but it gives an idea of how the prison and mines intersecting affect the day-to-day of the people stationed here. It definitely makes sense they would use the materials extracted for weaponry, and have the factories the dividing line. Seriously though, this area is pretty difficult. I can't imagine how a newbie might feel when I struggle with my very mediocre skill. It can be extremely tempting to abuse quick saving and loading here if anything goes wrong, and while I'm guilty of doing this myself when recording footage, I don't think it's a good idea for a first playthrough. It's hard to get better at the game and learn to manage developing situations if you never allow yourself to experience that side of the systems in the first place. You have to fail every now and again. Garrett's arsenal isn't there to just sit unused. If you genuinely struggle, then it's a good opportunity to explore the effects of what he can do, and what you can learn from patrol routes, take notes on your map, and so on. Once you're out of that frying pan, you're into the fryer, i.e. the prison.
In truth, I have never heard such carrying on as this thief's pawn Cutty.
One would think these scum had never faced tribulation in their lives.
For a time I thought Block 4 might never sleep again for his coughs. But he quiets now.
Good. Death or durance 'twill be the same for him in the end.
The prison is built upon 4 separate cell blocks connected together by a maze of pathways, guard posts, and probably one of the most humiliating central courtyards I've ever seen. The prison has a rudimentary alarm system which can't be disabled once it goes off, and periscope eyes serving as cameras. While a few later missions have alarms, this is actually the only one in this game to have cameras, which I assume is due to system limitations. It wouldn't make much sense to be able to easily disable the alarm in a literal prison without some sort of all clear, and there's no sense building out the mechanic further without deeper considerations on design. If the alarm is triggered, the entire cell block will go on high alert, which of course also has an effect on any patrolling guards. Probably to up the difficulty a bit, Thief Gold modified the guard routes to cover more ground, making it more likely for a domino effect to happen. There's also doors connected to lockboxes that require a key for easier navigation, so all that is a lot to deal with, but even under the worst conditions, it's still fully possible to complete the mission. What helps is a secret passage you can duck into nearby blocks 3 and 4, which already has a visitor. This is an escaped prisoner named Naman, who managed to escape with the contents of an evidence box, something that infuriates the Hammerites to the point they're quite literally covering up his disappearance by just saying he died during interrogation. Less fun than that, there's a small glitch where you can actually fail the mission by having Namon drown. Maybe he was pretending for just himself. Enough babbling, let's do a prison break, starting with Cuddy. Each cell block has a linear sneaking challenge with the upper guard, after which you need to examine the prisoner log and pull the correct switch to open the cell you want. But I always tend to get confused trying to read the logbook and just let everyone out at the same time. It creates a huge mess, but hey, that's a problem for the future. So this Cuddy conversation is the first time objectives update in the middle of gameplay, and is also the first in-game cutscene, which is mandatory. Something I always found a bit contentious since I'd rather be able to keep moving, but in this case this is too important of exposition and characterization to be missable.
Alright, old man. Let's get you out of here and me my money.
Afraid you're gonna be disappointed?
Good thing you're dying, Cuddy. Or I'd have to kill you for stiffing me. Again.
Snap, snap, puppy. But I owe you, so... Felix went after the Horn of Quintus, down the Bonehold. Left me his notes. The Hammers got him, put him in their evidence box. Loot collection, more like. Upstairs. Officers' quarters. Once you're up there, hidden passage. If damp hadn't rotted my lungs.
It's important to note that what Garrett says here isn't literally how he feels. Yes, he cares about his money, but in private he does consider Cuddy a reliable fence, and was willing to go to great lengths to rescue him. His dry, sarcastic comments to me indicates he's used to being disappointed by other people. I don't think he's the kind of person who'd be willing to kill in cold blood over what he's owed. Second, while setting up going to Bonehorde, we at the same time get some insight into the corruption with the Hammerites, with the evidence box housing prisoner possessions that get redistributed among the staff. It's honestly surprising anyone gets back out of here with things like this going on. Now, with Cuddy's death, the remaining objectives can technically be done in any order. The only problem is Basso.
Well, there's Basso. If he weren't unconscious, it'd be simpler, but now I'll have to carry him out.
Thus, it makes more sense to complete everything else first. Nabbing the Lucky Hand of Glory isn't too complicated, and directly behind Cell Block 1 is the combination church and barracks.
This must be how they spend all those tithes.
One interesting tidbit is that there isn't an actual entrance to the prison from here, which I'm pretty sure is just a minor mistake in the texture work that wasn't caught. Opening up the mission in Andromeda, you can see the mark for an entrance right here in this otherwise dead-end hallway. While it's unlikely to have ever been intended as a playable space since it'd make escaping way too easy, we can speculate that past this door would have been the main gate Garrett mentions in the briefing, perhaps with another security booth or something. Past the church is the top of the complex. There's a copy of the key to the safe in the office on normal and hard that is missing on expert, forcing either getting Namon's key or a copy from one of the guards. Fun fact, you might think the game just spawns in a key when needed, but it's actually the opposite. All objects in a level exist at initialization and are destroyed based on conditions. Since Thief 1 doesn't have any item randomization, generally the only condition that gets checked is the difficulty. Thus, it's more accurate to say objects are a Schrodinger's cat situation, with states determined once they're observed, which also includes Garrett's inventory in the shop. It's fairly common to find objects floating out of bounds or in dedicated rooms until they're needed due to this rule. Anyway, like before, the mission would end on normal once you get the Bonehorde map, but you still need to carry out Basso on hard and expert. This is, ironically, pretty easy on hard, since there's a secret waterway behind a Hammerite flag leading directly back to the mines. On expert, this is blocked off by a wall with some wine as a consultation prize, forcing a much longer way back. Noisemakers are your friend. Speaking of, if the prisoners somehow didn't get killed by the Hammerites, they all have various flee points within the factory. Since I was curious, I went ahead and knocked out every guard in the area to check where they all end up. None of them go down into the mines themselves. I suppose the implication is they're too dangerous, but you can always help them out by bringing a zombie over. We're almost done, so now let's go over the mission's unused content. I brought up the level's status as an internal demo for the publisher, and when looking through the audio files, you can see how most of the lines were recorded around that time. For demonstration purposes, there's tutorial lines that are distinct from the unused ones for Baffords, which mostly ended up being dropped for being redundant.
Better stick to the shadows here. If they see me, I'm in trouble.
While I don't think there are as many drastic changes to the level design as Bafford's, one interesting point of speculation is this ledge Garrett is aiming from, which is present in a March 1998 trailer. If we examine the top of the barracks in the final game, you can see how there's quite a lot of the cliffside left unused, with an unreachable ledge and both the roof of the building and the back face of the cliffs being fully modeled. The standard for elements of levels that are meant purely for visuals is to remove the backs in order to save on space. You can see this with most of the buildings in Bafford's, for example, so this model geometry here implies it was meant to be playable. The stairs leading into the church also have the oddity of a Hammerite priest in this corner on Expert. It's pretty unusual to just put an enemy in a blind corner, which Garrett even appears to have an unused line about.
I hate blind corners. You never know what you're gonna run into.
Closely examining pre-release material, we can see that there used to be a double-sided door right next to the staircase, and the corner of the barracks such as the dead end appeared to have some sort of pathway, with 2 Hammerites on the walkway outside rather than just 1. This all heavily implies there used to be an alternate path through the barracks, potentially one that would have allowed access to the nearby cliffs and the roof. This would be pretty similar in execution to the options getting from the mines to the factory, although I think just being able to get around the chapel and miss some relevant dialogue would be a net loss. There's an unused conversation between Hammerites about thieves and the trickster. This conversation helps put into perspective the story of Cragscleft.
"'Tis noted to us, the Felondina heretics and will crumble as old wood. Thieves respect not it. Divinity, even false divinity, is as the mud below their feet. They wist not it be clay that shall be shaped by the builder's hand. Nay, our walls be cut from the thickest stones, our gates be wrought from full iron. Any who pits his strength 'gainst their strength shall smash himself with his own effort, even as the fruit falling from a tree dashes itself on a rock below. The builder places thy challenges before thee as a stairway of hewn stone up the tower of thine life. When thou seekest to add to those challenges, to compass thine pride, thou dost clutter the design of the stairway and introduce cracks and weaknesses through which the trickster mayst enter and bring thy ruin."
Like, really zooming out and looking at the layers here, it's clear that the true rot to the prison isn't the literal bodies in the lower levels, but the Hammerites creating social circumstances where extreme systemic abuse creates the conditions which will ultimately ruin them. Like, really think about how wild it is that despite the Hammerite order being on the decline, they still opted to build a prison on top of an active infestation of undead, above spaces that were abandoned and lost because of them. Does that indicate an order that have things under control? They abandon old structures just to build things in an identical image. Fundamentally, they're stuck in an endless cycle of suffering, and sacrifice the poor and unfortunate to maintain the status quo. Having a main faction that's like this goes a long way to help resolve some of the potential dissonance a player might have when it comes to the morality of stealing. The layers to the world building and the noir detective demeanor Garrett has helps you ease into his headspace, and contrasting that with people who are unambiguously corrupt and cruel means you identify with him all the more. It's fantastic writing on both a narrative and gameplay level. Overall, Break From Cragscleft Prison is a pretty fantastic mission. It further expands the setting with its look at the Hammerites, provides important characterization for Garrett, and tests the player well with its increased navigational complexity and sneaking challenges.
Cuddy.
In the next part, we'll be going down into the Bone Horde and the depths of 3D adventure design. See you then.